My name is Travis Dale Garnett,
And where were you born?
Dripping Springs, Texas,
What was the date of your birth?
January the 1st, 1926. My parents were W.S. Garnett Jr. and Hattie Quick. My great-grandfather come from Kent, England. They left Liverpool in 1872, arrived in New Orleans by ship, and a little later on they migrated to Texas, and they got a grant through the government somehow, and they got 1,200 acres of land over at Mount Sharp, Texas. My grandfather, when about 1873, he lived at Mount Sharp. My grandfather moved over here in 1904, opened a blacksmith shop.
Where was the blacksmith?
It's on Mercer Street. The building's tore down right now, right across from Rippey's.
Mm-hmm.
And his son was Bill Garnett. My dad built the automotive garage right west of there, which the building is still there, but it's leased to my nephew as a propane place. It wasn't a funeral home. It was a little small building back where my dad's garage was. It sold caskets. A casket for a grown person would go about $80 down to $40. A child's about $35. A man's dress suit was $12, and a woman's dress about $7. The reason I know is I was a kid, just curious. I'd go over and just gawk around and watch them. Grandfather also would shoe horses or mules for 75 cents and furnish the shoes. He could take a wagon wheel that's completely wore out, and they'd what they call re-spoke it. Put it on a thing, put all new spokes on it, shrink the tires, the iron tires, and get them on it and get it going. Well, when I used to go down to Camp Ben McCullough, some of the old Civil War guys are still alive. And Tom Quick was my dad. He was the son of Jacob Quick. And he played the fiddle and sang songs and stuff like that. And whenever they played Dixie, all them old guys jump up and just holler and shout, "Wish I wasn't Dixie."
So did you go every year to those reunions?
We camped down there. I camped down there every year till I was probably 14 years old.
And what sort of things did you youngsters do there?
Well, they had, the corner was always there. They had rides, they had a dance at night, and they had different things under the tabernacle down there, all kind of talks and stuff like that. Where the new drugstore is, there was this Methodist church there, and my dad built a huge tabernacle there with the help of a guy that worked for him was Leroy Roberts. And my dad furnished all the tin and iron and fixed it and everything like that. And also, back then there was no electricity, and my dad had 32-volt light plinths that he had accumulated and stuff like that. And you could buy 32-volt light bulbs. Well, he put that north of the church so they'd have electric lights. Well, the noise got so loud that he had to dig a hole in the ground to bury the muffler so it wouldn't make any noise. Before they had that, my granddad, Will Garnett, he'd always just take a coal oil lantern down there is what they had for lights. And he would, every Sunday, you could mark his word that he'd ring that church bell when church time started. When we get out of Sunday school, we'd go straight to Mount Gainer. That's where my grandpa run the store over there. Tom Quick run the store over there. And that store, he run a little old general store. Wasn't nothing to it. Had no windows, just the door to get in it. And straight across from it, he had a grist mill and a thing where you make sorghum molasses. And on top, it's kind of on the top of a hill. People haul their sugar cane in there, and the press was there, and the mules would go round and round, and that would turn that press, and they'd feed the sugar cane in it. It'd drain out the bottom, the juice, and run downhill to a flat tank, about a 4 by 8 tank that had a shed built over it, and the tank sat on rocks on each side. And to cook molasses, you have to build a fire under it to cook it to make it turn out sorghum molasses. He wouldn't ever charge people; he'd just do it on the shares. There also was a church there and a school there. That's where my mother and all the sisters went to school, at the Mount Gainer Church. It's all gone now except those steps are still there. Yeah, it was an old 1924 Dodge. He cut the back off a sedan car and put a little dump bed back there. Everybody called it the old black Dodge. And I'd load up with kids. We'd go out there, and none of us had bathing suits, and we'd just go out there and skinny dip.
No girls around?
Well, there wasn't supposed to be, and I don't know. When I was in the 8th grade, I had a teacher named Rama Dillingham. That was her name. And some of us boys caught a big old chicken snake, cut it off, and put it in her desk drawer, about 6 feet long. She pulled that out and fell plumb over backwards. And I'm gonna say, 40 years after that, I had a granddaughter in Austin learn to be a beautician named Holly Garnett. And this gray-headed lady'd come in there and wanted to get her hair styled. And Holly had Garnett on her blouse. Said, "Did you know Travis Garnett?" Holly said, "Yeah, he's my granddad." "Did you know him?" She said, "I knew him well." I was just a kid then, but I'd worked at my dad's service station. Gasoline was 15 cents a gallon. Kerosene was 10 cents a gallon. You could buy 25 pounds of ice for 10 cents.
So you were buying ice right up until electricity came into Dripping Springs. When was that?
My dad had bought those light plants and had in the 30s, and it had 2 Delco light plants. And we had electric lights in my house. And after he had that 32-volt electricity, these old Dodge cars had a generator and starter made together, and it's real heavy duty. He could convert those over to electric motor on 32 volt. He made a motor out of those to pull his pump jack, his grinding wheels, and stuff like that. He also made a big drill press, which is in my shop that I still use. Him and his granddaddy made it. And he made his own air compressor. He had a steel turning lathe, and he did a lot of machine work too. Well, when I was a kid, right behind where my son lives now in that rock house, that little stream used to keep water in it all the time. And my dad had a little dam across there, and he built a water wheel that the water would go over and turn it. On the other end, he had a large wheel, wooden wheel, with a fan belt to run down so that water turned. He'd run that fan belt to a generator to charge batteries with that water in it. But since then, it's been dry weather, and it all got tore down. They asked me if the Army or Navy. I said I'd rather go in the Navy.
So, what did you feel about when you left home? What did it feel like?
Oh, I don't know. I had never been no further than 50 miles out of Dripping Springs in my life. We got on an old train, and it took us about 2 or 3 days to get out to California, where I took boot camp. And half the time I had to sleep on the floor because it was so crowded. I took boot camp in San Diego on North Island. And the first thing he put me in is KP and stuff like that, and I stayed in it 2 or 3 months. But it wasn't bad. Could have got all I wanted to eat and stuff like that. We went from Pearl Harbor to Anahuac. That was another island. We sat in that place about 2 weeks, and we finally landed on the south end of Samar Island. That's the island right across from Leyte. A little old town was named Giwan, but we landed on the jungle. We got out and went straight to the jungle where the Seabees had laid out a bunch of bombs on the ground, stuff like that. That's where we slept right there for 2 weeks among those bombs. And the Seabees was starting to clear the land out to be able to airstrip. We didn't have nothing to eat but sea rations for about 2 weeks, and all the bananas you wanted to, because it's on the trees over there. Finally, they got an old tent for a mess hall and stuff like that. And I was put on the detail that buried the dead ones. So, sometimes bodies would wash in from the sea. You didn't know if it was white, black, or what it was. They'd go ahead and give them a military funeral. The most ever buried at one time was 18 or either 28, just arms or legs and heads, all in 3 big boxes. And that's hard on you when you're 19 years old. And when that bugler played them taps, tears just roll down your eyes. All them young boys that died over there.
When did you?
I married Lois Garnett in 1947, I think, like that. At that time, I was working a little bit for Alva Hayden, Mr. Hayden. He and I was in the Navy at the same time. But he had got back and opened a garage, and I worked there 2 or 3 years. Then after that, I went in business for myself and run an Exxon station. And I got a street hot rod that I made in 1953. And where the barbershop is now, that little, you know up there where it is, that was one of the garages I was in. That's where I built that car. I bought a Model A for $15. I cut the top off and channeled it and lowered the top and made that old car. I still got the car out here. It's been restored twice since then. This old lady said that Garnett boy never lived to be 25 driving that car. Well, I told you about the Model A. Another car we had is a 47 Fiat body that I built a tubular frame, and I built the whole where you could tilt the whole front end, a whole car body up to work on the motor. One time we was racing at Little River, and it didn't have any front brakes. It had rear brakes and a parachute. One time Gary was running it through 130, and the parachute didn't open. He went out plumb out through the end of the driveway and across the major highway and never got hit. Another time we was on another car, had a Pontiac Firebird car, and had a fiberglass hood on it. It's 2 pins you stick down and put pins to it to hold the hood on. And he's running through it about 100, and we got to put the pins in, and the hood flew up and went up like 100 feet and come back just like a butterfly. But it never hit anybody. My dad in 1920, he built a race car himself. It's an old 24.5 Buick and had huge wheels on it. It's 28 inches high. He told me he ordered the tires out of Detroit, Michigan. It cost $50 a piece, and that was high dollar back there. And he said a guy out of Austin had a new Studebaker that called him and wanted to challenge him to a race. That's way in the 20s. My dad said I outrun him in second gear. Well, at that time, it wasn't Exxon. It was Enco, I think, is the name of it. And at the time when I got back, gasoline's about 30-something cents, like that. And people would stop by and buy gas and stuff like that.
Where was it situated?
At that particular time, it's on that same building up there where the barbershop is. And later on, I moved back down here to my dad's building where the propane company was, and run it until 1960. And that's when the highway changed from this street over to where it is now. At that time, I was doing mechanic work, and also I drive a school bus, and my wife pumped the gas while I was gone. Just like that. One time on a school bus route, I went from down to Jacob's Well, across through the back roads, and come out on Henley. And one time a deer had jumped the fence and broke his neck, and I said, well, I'm just going to put that on a school bus and I'll skin it when I get home. And anyhow, when I got home, of all things, one of the school bus drivers, a woman, was flagging me down to stop. I just pulled around behind her, talked out the window. That's what she wanted. I didn't want her to see I had that deer on the school bus. Bill went on to be a school teacher. Danny and Gary liked Little Phineas High School, and I said, y'all come out here and work for me. They've been working in that garage ever since, and they're expert mechanics, can work on anything or fix any kind of car. And they're running it today. I was on the city council 2 or 3 terms, and finally they appointed me to take care of Founders Park. At that time, they'd lock the gate every night, and I had to go and unlock it in the morning. I'd also mowed the grass on the whole park for 2 or 3 years. I'd empty all the trash cans, clean the restrooms, and clean under the pavilion and stuff like that for 2 or 3 years for free. Now I think they pay people to do that stuff like that. And I was on the, at that time I was working for Bill Hayden. We had an old Army weapons carrier that he had bought, I guess, and put about a 200-gallon water tank on it. And that was Dripping Springs' first fire truck. Later on, Mr. Hayden had got another old fire truck. It was a 1917. It was so old it had a chain drive to the back wheels, and you couldn't drive it over 20 miles an hour to get to shaking. So, but anyhow, finally, we got us a firehouse down there, and we got better equipment. And one time, on West Fitzhugh Road, the house was on fire. We went over there, and the elderly lady lived there, and her husband was in the house with it burning, and he was an invalid. We went in there and got him out, of course, and accidentally bumped his head, and his wife gives a good chewing out because we bumped his head. Another time down on Elder Hill Road, we got a call down there at 3 o'clock in the morning. A couple from Wembley had attended a party on that road, and they was in 2 different vehicles. Well, he left ahead of her, and I guess they'd been drinking. He hit the very end of a chain link fence, and the top pipe is about this big around. It went through the dash, through the windshield, hit him in the chest, pushed him through a double cab pickup, and on through him and come out the back, and his shirt pocket was hanging on the end of it. And anyhow, I was running the jaws of life. We cut it off about 6 inches in front, 6 inches in back, and that man lived. That's 2 of the things I really remember about that fire department. I've been on the water board 30 years. When I first got on there, we didn't have too much equipment. And I've been with Mr. Alva Hayden several times to patch leaks with just a grubbing hoe and a shovel. That's how we did it back then. Finally, we got better equipment and can do anything now. We got a backhoe and 3 or 4 pickups and a rock cutter, stuff like that, where we can patch. And Doug Combs is our manager, and he's really good on that. Keeps everything going. The Rinky-Dink Domino was built by an old guy named John Willie Butler, and it wasn't where it is now. It wasn't that quite there. It used to sit on Mercer Street, and he would charge them $25 a year to help pay for it, each one, or $25 a month. I forget what it was. Anyhow, they moved it back to where it is at the present time. We go up there and play. Instead of playing Moon, we mostly play dominoes. We play Moon. Moon is we take all the blanks out except the double blank, and then 3 can play at a time. You draw 7 dominoes, and there'd be 1 in the middle. Whoever gets the bid gets to get that domino, and that would help to make your hand. I can remember when I was 6 or 7 years old, standing out in front of my dad's service station. I'd holler, Mama, here comes a car. About maybe 1 or 15 cars would pass through dripping all day long. I remember when people used to have a herd of goats and stuff and have to move through, they'd drive them right through town. Maybe 100 or 150 goats or cows. At that time, all the town cows, people just run loose in the pastures out here. And when we was in high school, we'd play those dare best games in Wolfie over the river. You have to watch it or you'd get fall in some cow manure. Oh, I don't know. I try to get along with everybody.